Victor Lustig, or at least that's the name he became famous for. No one knows whether this is his real name or not because there is nothing that confirms it. This person assumed dozens of identities in numerous narratives about him and his past. Every time he moved to a new place or tried to con someone, he presented himself with a different persona, complete with its own name and background. Nothing confirms the accuracy of any of these stories. He is mostly known by his most famous alias, Victor Lustig. It is also widely believed that he lived from 1898 to 1947. His most famous swindling operation in Victor's history was selling the Eiffel Tower. Yes, the Eiffel Tower. He sold it not just once, but twice. Imagine that. This was the most famous con job he pulled off in his lifetime. But before this operation, he had pulled off dozens, maybe hundreds of other swindles. In this video, we will first look at his earliest and most significant swindles, then gradually go through his story in chronological order until his arrest and the end of his life. The first thing we should know about Victor Lustig is that he is a skilled person in different domains, one of which is sleight of hand. Victor was dexterous. He had the skill to use his hand smoothly. He was also good at card tricks. He knew them all. And what he used to do with cards was really astonishing. This had helped him in his fraud operations. Victor's deceit instinct and ability to deceive people grew gradually. He was really good at fraud and deceit, to the point that he used to manipulate people with his magic words and tricks. According to some sources, Victor had been imprisoned dozens of times, almost 40 times, either by the people he deceived or by the police. But each time he got out of it smoothly. Among the skills that Victor has acquired is his fluency in Italian, French, and English, besides other languages that he used to speak, but didn't master. It's believed that Victor was born in the Czech Republic, and when he got to his 20s, he moved to France, exactly to Paris, where he began pickpocketing. He used to steal people while they were walking or even while he was talking to them. At that moment, Victor began to discover his skills, the sleight of his hands, and the smoothness he had. He began to deepen more in this domain until he became able to carry out fraud operations. One of the biggest targets Victor had was the luxury ships that sailed from France to the United States. This ship's clients were usually rich and belonged to the high class, so they were a good target for him. This was the time when Victor began to use his most famous name, Victor Lustig. This personality was a man who belonged to a rich, noble family. He used to put on very elegant suits and act courteously, but at the same time, he used to give the impression that he is modest. He knew that the mix of these qualities in one personality would grant him people's trust and allow him to get more chances to deceive the rich clients who travel on those ships. Despite his young appearance, Victor managed to convince many people who were on that ship that he was one of the biggest producers on Broadway, which is an area in the U.S. that is known for arts and theaters and is located exactly in New York. Victor used to pretend to be a big producer on Broadway, and he is actually about to start working on a musical show, and he is on the lookout for investors. Indeed, he managed to convince many people to invest in his show, and he gathered large amounts of money from them. He kept traveling between France and the U.S. on those ships, and each time he found new people to deceive the same way. He makes them believe that this is an investment opportunity that they have to seize. He takes the money, and then he vanishes immediately. Unfortunately for Victor, those cruises became fewer when the First World War began in 1914. Sailing by ships became dangerous, especially in the Atlantic Ocean. Thus, all those huge ships were stopped in that period. At that time, Victor realized that it was time to look for another way to commit fraud in another place. Instead of going back to France, he decided to stay in the U.S., exactly in Kansas, where he decided to start a new fraud adventure. This time, he wasn't alone. Victor found a partner named Dan Collins, who was known as Dapper. Victor and his new friend Dapper chose a new scam method that would bring them a huge fortune. Victor would keep repeating this method permanently throughout his life because of its effectiveness. This scam was a box that they named the Romanian money box. It was a normal wooden box, but it was designed in a way that made it appear like a complex machine. It contained gears inside, with arms that appeared to be mechanical, so that they could tell people that it's a device. They alleged that this small box could print any currency bill. They claimed that if someone had inserted a $100 bill into this box and added some chemical material, the box would make a copy of it. And the copy of the bill would be identical to the point that if someone went to the bank, the bankers wouldn't distinguish it. This was their allegation. The only bad thing about that box is that it needs 6 hours to get the copy bill, and the next printing should be after 12 hours. They put this condition in place so they could have a convincing reason why they were offering the box for sale. Because if they really had a box that printed money, why would they sell it? The fact that the box needed 18 hours to make a copy of one bill seems to be a convincing reason why those two strange people wanted to sell that box. Victor and his friend first explain how the box works to their victim, and then they ask him to give them a $100 bill. They insert it into the box in front of him, and they put printing paper and ink in it so the process appears realistic. Afterward, they wait for 6 hours for the box to print a copy of the $100 bill. Then they open the box, give him back his $100, and show him the printed copy. Actually, the banknote that comes out of the box is real. Victor had already inserted it inside the box. Then they go with their victim to the bank to show him that they can deposit that copy of the $100 without any problems. At that moment, they offer the box for sale for thousands of dollars, sometimes more and sometimes less. It depends on their victim. The maximum amount they could reach was $10,000. Of course, they choose their victim carefully. They search for him, and they know his financial situation, so they can offer him the box for a price they are sure he can afford. You may say that $10,000 is a cheap price for such a box, but what you should know is that a dollar at that time was worth almost 25 times the dollar today, meaning $1,000 at that time is worth about $25,000 today. So they were taking huge amounts of money from their victims. However, the victims were completely convinced that it was a profitable investment, even though it would take time. Moreover, Victor used to put many $100 banknotes inside the box to make it appear like it worked for several days, giving them the chance to escape. But in fact, they didn't need to escape. When the victim realizes that he was tricked, he can't go to the police because if he did, he would be admitting that he was trying to forge money, which is a huge crime that he could be sued for. It was really an integrated, profitable scam. Thus, Victor kept doing it several times, but at the same time, he wasn't satisfied with the box's trick, and he was still carrying out other different scams. One of the scams he did in that period had a strange ending and showed how that man could run out even if he was caught. In 1922, Victor went to a bank in Missouri called the American Savings Bank, which is known for its good reputation. In this operation, Victor impersonates a new personality named Robert Duval. He went to the bank and offered them First World War bonds worth $32,000 in return for $10,000 in cash. These bonds are official government debt documents, but it takes time until they can be taken back in cash. So Victor offered $32,000 in real bonds in return for $10,000 in cash. But what happened is that Victor, thanks to the sleight of his hand, managed to deceive the bankers and change the bonds with normal papers at the moment of the handing over, meaning that before handing them the bonds, he changed them with normal paper. So he took the bonds plus the $10,000. It's really a huge amount. It's worth $250,000 today. The bank wouldn't let him go, so they hired special detectives to track him. They found him in Kansas, but what happened was quite amazing. Victor managed to convince them his arrest would cause a huge problem for the bank. If this had been exposed, the bank would lose their clients' trust, and they would immediately look for other banks. The bank managers had been convinced by what he said, so they decided not to sue him. Besides, they let him keep $1,000 of the $10,000 that he stole. This man, even after getting caught, still manages to come out as a winner. As it was said at the beginning of the video, Victor has been caught around 40 times, whether by people or by the police, but each time he finds a way out. Despite the lot of scams he had been doing, Victor felt like he began to attract attention, and the scamming chances became fewer than before. So he decided to go back to the city where he lived for a long period of his youth, Paris. In 1925, Victor would carry out the most famous scam of his life, the operation that would make his name resonate to this day, an operation that no scammer, no matter how confident and skilled he is, would think of. One day, Victor was sipping his coffee and reading the newspaper when he came across an article that talked about the Eiffel Tower. It was mentioned that the tower needs extensive maintenance, which would cost the government a lot. He read that public opinion might begin supporting the idea of the government getting rid of the tower, viewing it as more of a liability than an asset. At the moment, the crazy idea of selling the Eiffel Tower comes to his mind. The idea was to offer it in secret to a group of metal dealers and tell them that the government decided to get rid of the tower and was actually on the lookout for a buyer for the iron and metal it was made of. Of course, to execute this plan, he had to impersonate a government official, so he hired a professional forger to create documents that would make it appear as if he were a legitimate government employee. Afterward, he reached out to 5 of the top metal dealers in Paris and invited them to a confidential meeting at an expensive hotel. The 5 dealers came to the meeting. Victor showed them the forged documents that appeared like legitimate official documents, and he pretended to be a high-ranking governmental official. He told the dealers that the government decided to dispose of the Eiffel Tower and sell the metals it was made of, and he was assigned to choose the appropriate buyer, claiming that they had been selected carefully because of their good reputations, and the government wanted to see the offers and auctions they would offer to buy the tower. He then emphasized that the meeting details should be kept secret because the government didn't want to announce them to the public so as not to stir up controversy. During the meeting, Victor identified his appropriate target among the 5 dealers. His name was Andre Poisson. This dealer had a smaller business than the 5 other dealers. He had a weak personality, and he was doing his best to raise his name among the business community in Paris. Victor felt like he could exploit him more than the others, so he held a separate meeting with him, during which he expressed his sympathy for him and wanted to help him boost his name. Although his chance to get the deal was lower than that of the 5 other dealers, he offered him the deal in return for a suitable amount as a bribe. In other words, besides selling the Eiffel Tower, Victor pretended to be a corrupt government official to get a huge bribe as well. Andre Poisson paid the amount for which he would buy the Eiffel Tower, in addition to the amount they had agreed on as a bribe. The total amount was around 70,000 French francs. Once Victor got the money, he fled to Vienna, Austria. He stayed days in a hotel waiting for the storm to pass, but no news of the scam appeared in the French newspapers. This had surprised him. Why didn't Andre report the sizable sum of money that had been stolen from him? He assumed that it was probably due to his weak personality, because doing so would be embarrassing. If this story got out, it would ruin his reputation and make him a laughingstock in front of everyone. Apparently, Andre makes the decision to keep quiet and keep it under wraps. After Victor saw that everything was going all right, he decided to do it again. He got used to repeating his small scams, but after repeating this huge scam, it seemed that the guy had entered a state of madness. In the same year, Victor went back to Paris and carried out his trick with 5 different dealers. He identified one of them as his target, and he used the same trick with him, the trick of the corrupt official. This time, the dealer apparently sensed that something was wrong, so he decided to report it to the police. However, Victor was cautious. Once he found out that the police were chasing him, he boarded the first ship heading to America and left France. By the way, Victor had a family and used to provide for them a lot because he kept them in hotels. They used to move from one hotel to another, so that no one could ever track them or exploit them to track Victor. We won't go deep into Victor's life, but what you should know is that despite all the amounts and the fortune Victor had gathered from the scams, he used to spend so much money, whether on his family or on himself. So he had to keep carrying out his scams. Victor continued his scam operations. One of the most famous he did in that period was on Al Capone, the famous gang leader in Chicago. Victor wasn't that dumb to con Al Capone directly. He went to him and asked for $50,000 to execute a scam, which would easily double the amount, and then he would take his share. Al Capone agreed and gave him $50,000. Victor didn't want to spend the money because he knew that if Al Capone discovered that it was just a scam, he would execute him immediately. Victor deposited the $50,000 in the bank, and after a period, he went to withdraw it again. He went back to Al Capone and told him that the scam didn't work. He told him that he lost all the money that he had given him, but he took all the money he had and borrowed what was left until he gathered the $50,000. Al Capone was impressed by the situation and felt that he was dealing with an honest and loyal person, and this is what Victor was looking for. This man had the ability to read people and their personalities in a strange way. Al Capone, being the leader of the gang, was used to the idea that people would betray him in such situations, which always prompted him to resort to violence so that he could prove himself. But this time, when things didn't go as planned, this man did his best to get things back on track. Victor knew how to manipulate Al Capone and make him sympathize with him. Then Victor went to Al Capone again and told him that his current situation was miserable. He pushed himself and the people around him to the limit until he gathered the $50,000 and gave it back to him. And he told him that he would appreciate any help he could offer him. Victor knew how to smoothly manipulate people in front of him. Indeed, his words had an impact on Al Capone, and he gave $5,000 from the amount that was originally his money. Victor was literally clever but malicious. Victor continued with fraudulent operations here and there until he got involved in a major operation in 1930. However, this time, it wasn't a direct scam, but rather a counterfeiting operation. In this operation, he had two partners. The first partner was a chemist named Tom Shaw, and the second was a sculptor named William Watts. This operation was so successful that they managed to forge and distribute more than $1 million in that year, 1930. $1 million was roughly equivalent to $15 million in today's currency, which was an enormous amount. They were able to introduce this money into the economy to the extent that it became difficult to trace the counterfeit bills because they had become mixed with genuine currency in circulation in the market. This huge operation put them under the FBI's radar. In addition to high-ranking security agencies, secret agents and detectives conducted an investigation, trying to follow up on leads one after the other. Their investigations led them to recognize more than one name that Victor was using. They had also known about the Romanian money box scam, which Victor was still using from time to time. At that time, Victor scammed a police officer from Texas with the box trick. When the officer realized that he had been scammed, he didn't tell anyone, but he chased Victor on his own until he managed to catch him. But due to Victor's cunning and malice, he managed to convince him that the box was working well and that he was using it in the wrong way. So he told him that he would compensate him and give him back the price of the box plus an additional amount. The officer accepted the deal, and Victor gave him thousands of dollars in order to let him go. But what the officer did not know was that all that money was fake. After the officer had gone to the bank to deposit that money, he was arrested immediately. The FBI questioned the officer, and with his help, they'd managed to trace Victor's location. Victor was in one of the hotels in New York, and on May 10, 1935, he was finally arrested and taken to prison, awaiting his trial. Unfortunately, this time, Victor couldn't escape with his usual tricks and deceptions. But this wasn't the end of Victor's story. If you think that a few walls and iron bars would keep him imprisoned, then you still don't understand how this man's mind works. First of all, it's important to note that this prison was not a typical prison. It was a facility owned by the federal government, and while it resembled a prison, it didn't have the same level of security. The federal government used this facility to detain prisoners until their trials. During the initial period Victor spent in this facility, he noticed that they didn't keep track of the number of blankets they distributed to the inmates. So he started collecting blankets until he had enough material to make a rope. On September 1, 1935, just one day before his trial, Victor managed to cut through the iron bars of the bathroom window. He used the rope he had crafted from the blankets to climb out of the window and descend to the ground. To divert the attention of passersby and people around the building, he pretended to be a janitor cleaning the windows. Slowly, he made his way to the ground. Victor's bag of tricks seemed endless. In the end, the FBI managed to apprehend him just 1 month after his escape. He was tried in November 1935 and sentenced to 20 years in prison. But this time, it wasn't just any prison. It was the infamous Alcatraz prison, built on a small island and considered the most secure prison in America at the time. Victor remained imprisoned for several years, suffering from illness and pneumonia, until he passed away in 1947. And so we have reached the end of our extraordinary story, which I hope you have enjoyed. If you found it captivating, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.